A young fighter mocks a 1950s boxing legend at a charity gala, pushing the 72-year-old champion aside and humiliating him in front of hundreds of guests. The arrogant MMA punk grabs the microphone, challenging any old-timer to fight him for $10,000, laughing as the boxing hero trembles with age and shame. But the quiet martial arts instructor stepping forward to defend the elder's honor isn't just another volunteer. This is Donnie Yen himself. The cocky fighter has no idea he just disrespected a legend in front of the man who made Wing Chun famous worldwide and spent decades perfecting the art of destroying bullies with surgical precision. While the punk flexes for his cameras, thinking he's about to embarrass another has-been, the action star approaches with the calm of a master who's choreographed 1,000 fights and won them all. The boxing veterans in the crowd recognize their savior and step back, knowing they're about to witness something extraordinary. The young fighter's crew keeps recording, expecting to capture another viral humiliation, but they're actually filming their boy's education and respect. What happens when you mock a legend in front of another legend? Will the punk survive learning why some masters never age? What happened next would terrorize the bully for the rest of his pathetic career. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal chandeliers of the Philadelphia Marriott cast warm light across the elegant ballroom as Philadelphia's boxing elite gathered for the annual Golden Gloves charity gala. Silver-haired men in perfectly pressed tuxedos exchanged stories of legendary fights, while their wives sipped champagne from delicate flutes. The walls displayed decades of boxing history, vintage gloves signed by forgotten champions, faded photographs of fighters who'd given everything for glory, and championship belts that had once meant the world to their owners. Mickey Torino, 78 and still sharp as a tack, gripped his martini glass with hands that had once knocked out 3 contenders in a single month. Across the room, Bobby the Bull Castellano adjusted his bow tie with the same precision he'd once used to land devastating uppercuts. These men had fought when boxing was pure, when honor mattered more than money, when a handshake meant everything. Remember, when fighters respected the sport? Mickey asked, his voice carrying the weight of decades in smoky gyms and crowded arenas. Bobby nodded, watching younger guests scroll through their phones instead of listening to the stories being shared around them. Different world now, Mickey. Different values. Event coordinator Janet Morrison hurried between tables, checking her clipboard with nervous energy. 200 distinguished guests had paid premium prices to support inner-city youth boxing programs, and everything had to be perfect. The silent auction featured memorabilia worth thousands, from vintage training equipment to signed photographs of legendary bouts that had shaped the sport's golden era. Retired sports reporter Frank DeLuca held court near the bar, regaling a small crowd with tales of covering the great fights of the 1950s and 60s. His weathered face lit up as he described ringside seats for battles that had become the stuff of legend. "Those fighters had something you don't see anymore," Frank said, gesturing with his wine glass. "Heart. Real heart. They fought for more than just paychecks." The conversation paused as Janet tapped her microphone, feedback squealing briefly through the sound system. The room settled into expectant silence, faces turning toward the small stage where a podium waited beneath spotlights. "Ladies and gentlemen," Janet announced, her voice carrying across the hushed ballroom, "our guest of honor will arrive shortly. Please welcome the man who embodied everything noble about our sport, Lightning Lou Marcelli." Applause rippled through the crowd as anticipation built for the beloved former champion's appearance. Lou Marcelli's black sedan pulled up to the hotel's curved entrance, its polished surface reflecting the warm glow of the building's elegant facade. At 72, Lou moved with careful deliberation as his grandson Tommy helped him from the passenger seat. The carved wooden cane in his weathered right hand wasn't just for support. It was a symbol of dignity earned through 48 professional fights and a lifetime of giving back to his community that Lou's once powerful frame had surrendered to. Time's relentless march, his shoulders stooped where they'd once been broad and intimidating. But his eyes still held the intelligence that had made him a thinking fighter's fighter, someone who'd won through strategy as much as strength. His tuxedo hung perfectly despite his diminished stature, tailored to honor the occasion and the man wearing it. The hotel's revolving door whispered as Lou stepped through, Tommy staying close but allowing his grandfather the independence he'd fought to maintain. Inside, the marble lobby echoed with the gentle murmur of the gala already in progress. When Lou appeared in the ballroom doorway, conversation stopped. Then, like a wave building offshore, applause began, first from the old-timers who remembered his prime, then spreading throughout the room until 200 people were on their feet. The ovation lasted 30 seconds, each clap a testament to a career built on skill, sportsmanship, and unwavering character. Lou raised his free hand in acknowledgement, his smile genuine but humble. He'd never been comfortable with attention, preferring to let his actions speak louder than words. As the applause faded, he made his way slowly to the podium, Tommy guiding him through the maze of round tables draped in crisp white linens. "Thank you," Lou said simply, his voice carrying the gentle rasp of age but losing none of its warmth. "Boxing gave me everything: discipline, respect, and the chance to pass something worthwhile to the next generation. Tonight isn't about celebrating an old fighter. It's about lifting up young ones." He paused, gripping the podium's edges with hands that trembled slightly but still commanded respect. True champions don't just win fights. They lift others up. They make the sport better for everyone who comes after. The crowd murmured approval as Luke carefully made his way to the head table, where a place of honor waited. As he settled into his chair with Tommy's assistance, the hotel's main doors burst open with sudden, jarring force. Tyler, the tornado, Brennan exploded into the refined atmosphere like a thunderclap in a library. At 24, he stood 6'2" with the kind of muscular build that commanded attention whether he wanted it or not. Sleeve tattoos covered his arms in intricate patterns that told stories of victories and struggles, while his confident swagger announced his presence to every corner of the ballroom. His entourage followed like a small storm system manager. Eddie Torino whispering promotional angles in his ear, cornerman Jake "Bulldog" Martinez scanning the room with predatory eyes, and strength coach Rick Santos recording everything on his phone for social media content. Their casual athletic wear clashed violently with the formal atmosphere, as if they'd deliberately chosen to disrespect the occasion. "Finally, some real fighters in this museum," Tyler announced loudly, his voice cutting through conversations. Like a blade, he surveyed the elegant crowd with obvious disdain, taking in the tuxedos, evening gowns, and carefully arranged memorabilia. "When do we get to see some actual fighting instead of listening to stories about the Stone Age?" Eddie grinned beside him, already calculating publicity angles. This was exactly the kind of controversy that generated headlines and social media buzz. Tyler's last fight had been forgettable, a decision victory over an overmatched opponent. But crashing a charity gala could create the drama his career needed. "Check out all these antiques," Tyler continued, approaching a display case filled with vintage boxing gloves. "Did they actually fight with these things, or just pose for pictures?" Jake Martinez laughed on cue, his prison tattoos visible beneath his tight t-shirt. "Probably took them an hour just to put the gloves on with those ancient hands." When Janet Morrison approached with forced professionalism, Tyler barely acknowledged her introductions to the boxing legends present. Each handshake became an opportunity for mockery, commenting on Lou's trembling grip, joking about Mickey Torino's careful movements, dismissing Bobby Castellano's achievements as prehistoric accomplishments. 48 fights, Tyler said when Lou's record was mentioned. "I could have had 48 fights in 2 years if they'd let me fight guys from nursing homes." The insult hung in the air like smoke, drawing uncomfortable glances from guests who'd never heard such disrespect in their sacred space. Lou's face reddened, but he maintained the dignity that had defined his career, gripping his cane until his knuckles turned white. Tyler sensed the crowd's discomfort and fed off it, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "I bet I could take any 3 of these museum pieces at once and not even break a sweat." The ballroom fell completely silent, 200 people suddenly understanding they were witnessing something ugly unfold. From the side of the ballroom, a quiet voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "That's enough." Every head turned toward the source, a lean Asian man in his early 60s who moved with the fluid grace of water flowing downhill. He wore simple black slacks and a crisp white button-down shirt, his attire understated but somehow commanding more respect than Tyler's flashy presence. His posture was perfect, shoulders relaxed but ready, hands loose at his sides in a way that suggested complete physical control. The man approached with measured steps, his movements so economical that he seemed to glide across the marble floor. His face was calm, unlined by anger despite the disrespect he'd witnessed, but his dark eyes held depths that spoke of experience far beyond his apparent years. "I'm Danny," he said simply, extending his hand toward Tyler with old-world courtesy. "I volunteer with the youth martial arts program tonight. Perhaps we could discuss your concerns privately, away from our honored guests." His voice carried the slightest accent, each word carefully chosen and delivered with the kind of authority that didn't need to be loud to be heard. There was something magnetic about his presence, not threatening, but absolutely confident in a way that made Tyler's aggressive posturing seem crude by comparison. Tyler looked down at the offered hand with obvious disdain, using his 6-inch height advantage to try intimidating this unexpected interruption. "Danny? That's it. No fancy nickname. No championship belt." He laughed, the sound harsh against the ballroom's elegant acoustics. "Listen, old man, I don't need advice from another has been trying to relive his glory days." Danny's expression didn't change, but something subtle shifted in his stance, weight distributing differently, balance adjusting to some internal calculation. Those who knew martial arts might have recognized the change, but Tyler remained oblivious to the danger. "Signs. I simply ask that you show appropriate respect for Mr. Marcelli and the other honored guests," Danny continued, his voice remaining level despite Tyler's aggression. "They've given their lives to this sport and deserve better treatment." Tyler stepped closer, his chest nearly touching Danny's shoulder, trying to use physical intimidation the way he had countless times in gyms and training camps. "You know what, Danny? You just volunteered to be my warm-up act. Maybe after I embarrass you, these relics will understand what real fighting looks like." Danny didn't step back, didn't flinch, didn't show any of the fear Tyler expected. Instead, he simply positioned himself directly between Tyler and Lou, his placement protective but non-threatening. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately," Danny suggested again, his calm becoming more pronounced as Tyler's aggression escalated. Tyler's patience snapped like an overstretched rubber band. He placed his palm against Danny's chest and shoved, expecting the older man to stumble backward into the nearby tables. Instead, Danny flowed with the motion like water around a stone, remaining perfectly balanced while Tyler's aggressive push carried him slightly forward into empty space. The unexpected resistance only fueled Tyler's anger. He spun toward the podium and snatched the microphone from its stand, feedback squealing through the sound system as his voice boomed across the ballroom. "Listen up, everybody." Tyler's words echoed off the crystal chandeliers and elegant walls. "Time for a reality check in this museum. You're all sitting here celebrating fighters from the Stone Age, acting like they could compete with modern athletes." He pointed the microphone toward Lou, whose weathered face had gone pale. "You want to see what real fighting looks like? How about you show us that famous left hook, Lightning Lou? Come on, show these people why they should worship ancient history." The cruelty in Tyler's voice made several guests gasp audibly. Lou's hands trembled more visibly now, whether from age or emotion impossible to tell. The old champion gripped his cane tighter, his dignity under assault in front of people who'd looked up to him for decades. Matter of fact, Tyler continued, warming to his theme, "I'm feeling generous tonight. $10,000 says I can beat any old-timer in this room. Easy money from has-beens who never faced real competition." Eddie Torino's eyes lit up with dollar signs, already envisioning the social media explosion this would create. Jake Martinez and Rick Santos cheered their fighter on, their phones capturing every second of the humiliation. Danny's expression remained calm, but something fundamental shifted in his presence. His posture straightened almost imperceptibly, his weight settling into his feet differently. The change was subtle but absolute, like a blade being drawn from its sheath without making a sound. Those who truly understood fighting, the old boxers, who'd survived decades in rings where mistakes meant unconsciousness, recognized what they were seeing. Danny wasn't just standing anymore. He was preparing. Tyler, drunk on attention and his own perceived dominance, remained completely oblivious to the transformation occurring 3 feet away from him. The ballroom buzzed with uncomfortable tension as Tyler's challenge hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Many guests exchanged glances toward the exits, but morbid curiosity kept them rooted to their seats. This was either going to be a disaster or something they'd talk about for the rest of their lives. Danny stepped forward. With the same fluid grace he'd shown all evening, his voice cutting through the murmur of confused conversations. "I accept your offer," he said simply. The words were spoken so quietly that many guests leaned forward to make sure they'd heard correctly. Tyler's grin widened into something predatory as he processed the unexpected development. "You've got to be kidding me." Tyler laughed, handing the microphone back to a shocked Janet Morrison. "This is even better than I hoped. Easy money and a chance to educate another fossil about modern fighting." Janet Morrison stepped between them, her coordinators, instincts screaming that this was spiraling beyond her control. "Gentlemen, please. This is a charity event. We can't have just a friendly exhibition." Tyler interrupted, his voice carrying false reasonableness while his eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Nothing formal. Just showing these folks what real athletic ability looks like." Eddie Torino was already working his phone, texting contacts about the impromptu publicity opportunity. Hotel staff began hastily moving chairs and tables to create space, their movements efficient despite the bizarre circumstances. The elegant ballroom transformed rapidly as guests pressed against the walls, some holding their phones up to record whatever was about to unfold. Crystal glasses clinked as people moved, the formal atmosphere dissolving into something more primal and immediate. Danny removed his dress shoes and socks with methodical precision, placing them neatly beside a pillar. He rolled up his sleeves carefully, each movement deliberate and controlled. His preparation was almost ritualistic, like a meditation before action. Tyler stripped to his undershirt with theatrical flair, revealing the impressive physique that had carried him through a dozen professional fights. His tattoos told stories of victories and struggles, each design carefully chosen to project strength and intimidation. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Tyler's preparation was all aggression and display, meant to intimidate and impress. Danny's was internal, focused, almost spiritual in its quiet intensity. AS hotel staff finished creating their makeshift ring with rope barriers. Something electric filled the air, the kind of tension that precedes either disaster or legend. Word spread through the hotel like wildfire as late-arriving guests and curious staff crowded into doorways and pressed against windows overlooking the ballroom. Phones emerged from evening purses and jacket pockets as social media posts began appearing. "Crazy fight about to happen at charity gala," and "young MMA guy challenging old martial artist." The formal atmosphere had completely evaporated, replaced by the primal anticipation that surrounds any physical confrontation. Women in evening gowns stood on chairs for better views while distinguished gentlemen in tuxedos found themselves shouting encouragement like they were ringside at Madison Square Garden. Tyler played to his growing audience with shameless enthusiasm, flexing his impressive physique and shadowboxing with combinations that showcased his speed and power. Each punch whistled through the air with authority, his footwork crisp and aggressive as he worked himself in a fighting rhythm. "This is gonna be over in 30 seconds, he announced to his phone's camera, which Rick Santos held steady for maximum effect. "Time to show these people what modern fighting looks like." Jake Martinez massaged Tyler's shoulders while offering aggressive encouragement. "Destroy this old man, Tyler. Make it quick and brutal." Danny's preparation formed a study in contrasts. His stretching routine flowed like Tai Chi, each movement transitioning seamlessly into the next with purpose that went far beyond simple physical preparation. He worked through forms that loosened specific muscle groups and aligned his body's energy, preparing not just his muscles, but his mind for what was coming. Across the makeshift ring, retired boxing promoter Sal Benedetto squinted through his glasses, something familiar about Danny's movements nagging at the edges of his memory. The way the man moved, the precision of his form, the almost spiritual quality of his preparation. It reminded him of someone he'd seen before. Big Jim McBride leaned closer to Sal, his voice barely audible above the crowd's murmur. "Something about that guy seems familiar. Those movements, They're not amateur. Sal nodded slowly, his promoter's eye cataloging details that others missed. Danny's conditioning was too perfect, his form too classical, his presence too commanding. For a simple volunteer instructor, AS hotel staff made final adjustments to their rope barriers. Sal Benedetto's eyes suddenly widened in recognition, his face going pale as realization struck him like a physical blow. Sal Benedetto grabbed Lou Marcelli's arm with trembling fingers, his voice urgent despite his attempt to whisper. Mother of God, Lou, that's not just Danny. That's Donnie Yen. The revelation hit Lou like a left hook to the solar plexus. His grip on his cane tightened as the implications crashed over him in waves. The quiet volunteer who'd stepped forward to defend his honor wasn't just another martial artist. He was a living legend. The whispered recognition spread through the older guests like electricity through water. Frank DeLuca, the retired sports reporter, immediately understood the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Bobby the Bull, Castellano's jaw dropped as he remembered watching Yen's movies with his grandchildren, never imagining he'd see the man himself. Ip Man, Lou whispered in awe, his voice barely audible. The Wing Chun master. The one who made martial arts poetry. Mickey Torino leaned in, his weathered face showing recognition. The guy from all those action movies? The one who fought 10 men at once and made it look like dancing. The names and accolades rippled through conversations. Choreographer of Impossible Fights, master of traditional kung fu, the man who'd brought Eastern martial arts philosophy to Western audiences. Each whispered revelation added weight to what Tyler had unknowingly stepped into. Meanwhile, Tyler remained completely oblivious to the growing awareness around him, still shadowboxing and playing to his cameras. His crew was equally clueless, focused only on capturing what they assumed would be another viral video of their fighter dominating an overmatched opponent. Eddie Torino counted potential social media impressions in his head, while Jake Martinez and Rick Santos continued their aggressive encouragement, completely missing the changed atmosphere among the boxing legends who now watched with the reverence reserved for witnessing history. Janet Morrison made one final attempt to restore sanity, approaching both men with her hands raised. Gentlemen, please reconsider. This isn't appropriate for just a friendly exhibition. Tyler interrupted dismissively, still focused on his phone camera. Nothing these old folks haven't seen before. Danny politely declined her intervention with a slight bow, his respect for her concern evident, but his resolve unchanged. Hotel security guard Captain Murphy stepped forward to referee, his amateur boxing background the closest thing to official oversight available. 3 rounds, no ground fighting, stop on my command, he announced. Donnie Yen nodded respectfully. Tyler cracked his knuckles menacingly. The stage was set for education. Captain Murphy's whistle pierced the ballroom's tension as Tyler exploded forward like a missile fired from close range. His opening gambit was pure aggression, a wild haymaker thrown with every ounce of his considerable power, designed to end the fight before it truly began. The punch should have connected. Tyler's speed was legitimate, his reach advantage significant, his timing based on dozens of professional fights. But somehow, impossibly, his fist found only empty air where Donnie's head had been a split second before. Donnie had moved exactly 3 inches to his left, the minimal distance required to avoid destruction. His footwork was so economical it appeared effortless, like he'd simply thought himself out of danger's path. Tyler's momentum carried him forward into the space where his target should have been, leaving him off balance and vulnerable. The crowd murmured as Tyler spun around, confusion replacing confidence. He'd thrown that same punch successfully against fighters with legitimate records, yet this older man had made it look clumsy and telegraphed. Tyler reset and tried again. A sharp jab followed by a devastating hook combination that had knocked out his last 3 opponents. Again, Donnie simply wasn't where the punches landed. His head moved in tiny circles, following some invisible geometry that kept him safe while expending minimal energy. After 90 seconds of wild swinging, Tyler was breathing hard. His conditioning was excellent, but frustration burned energy faster than any physical exercise. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized none of his proven techniques were working. Donnie remained composed, barely perspiring despite the ballroom's warmth and growing crowd. His breathing stayed steady, his posture perfect, his expression calm as meditation. Occasionally, he'd tap Tyler's ribs or shoulders with fingertip touches, not strikes meant to damage, but precise contacts that demonstrated openings Tyler didn't even know he was creating. The touches were gentle, almost friendly, but their message was unmistakable. I could hurt you any time I choose. Each tap landed exactly where Tyler was most vulnerable, arriving without warning and disappearing before any counterattack was possible. That as round one's 3 minutes expired, Tyler staggered to his corner confused and winded, while Donnie returned to his side of the makeshift ring as composed as when he'd begun. Round 2 opened with Tyler adopting a more measured approach, his trainer's voice echoing in his memory about patience and setup punches. He'd learned that wild aggression wouldn't work against this mysterious opponent, so he fell back on boxing fundamentals drilled into him since childhood. Tyler's jab flicked out with textbook precision, aimed at Donnie's center line with proper form and timing. Instead of the satisfying impact he expected, Tyler felt his fist redirected by what seemed like a gentle slap. Donnie's pack saw technique had intercepted the punch at its midpoint, sending it harmlessly to the side while simultaneously positioning his own hand for a counterattack that never came. Frustrated but adapting, Tyler threw a series of hooks with varying heights and angles, using his reach advantage to probe for openings. Each punch met a different classical response. Bong saw deflections that turned power into empty air, Tin saw techniques that redirected force while maintaining perfect defensive positioning. The older guests began recognizing the sophisticated techniques on display. These weren't random defensive movements, but classical Wing Chun applications executed with textbook precision. Mickey Torino whispered to Bobby Castellano, "That's real kung fu, not the movie stuff. That's the science behind the art." Tyler varied his timing and combinations, his athletic intelligence showing as he tried to solve the puzzle in front of him. But every adjustment met a perfect counter, as if Donnie could read intentions before they became actions. The gap between them wasn't just physical. It was philosophical, technical, spiritual. When Tyler attempted a Superman punch, his signature technique that had earned him highlight reel knockouts, Donnie's response was almost casual. A slight step backward combined with perfect timing left Tyler committed to a technique that found nothing but air, his landing awkward and his recovery slow. The crowd's appreciation grew as they witnessed mastery in action. This wasn't just fighting. It was high art expressed through physical movement, centuries of accumulated wisdom applied with scientific precision. That Tyler's breathing became more labored while Donnie remained serene, demonstrating that true martial arts mastery wasn't about physical dominance, but about efficiency, timing, and the kind of deep understanding that comes only through decades of dedicated practice. Round 2 ended with Tyler landing his first significant contact, a glancing blow to Donnie's shoulder that the master had clearly allowed. Round 3 opened with Tyler abandoning boxing entirely, desperation driving him to his mixed martial arts background. If striking wouldn't work, perhaps grappling would level the playing field against this impossibly evasive opponent. Tyler shot for a double-leg takedown with the explosiveness that had earned him several submission victories. His technique was sound, his timing good, his commitment total. Against most opponents, the takedown would have succeeded immediately. Instead, Tyler found himself face-to-face with classical anti-grappling techniques he'd never encountered in any modern gym. Donnie's sprawl wasn't the wrestling-based defense Tyler expected, but something older and more sophisticated, a redirection that used Tyler's own momentum against him while maintaining perfect balance and positioning. When Tyler attempted to transition to a single-leg takedown, Donnie's response demonstrated traditional Chinese wrestling applications that most MMA fighters had never seen. What appeared to be gentle guidance contained devastating potential that experienced martial artists in the crowd recognized immediately. Tyler tried ankle picks, hip tosses, and every grappling technique in his arsenal. Each attempt met with classical counters that neutralized his advantages while teaching lessons about leverage, timing, and the proper application of force. Donnie's movements flowed like water around obstacles, adapting to each new attack while maintaining the initiative. The technical superiority was becoming obvious to everyone except Tyler's corner. Eddie Torino shouted contradictory advice, while Jake Martinez and Rick Santos offered increasingly desperate suggestions. none of them understanding what they were witnessing. Frank DeLuca leaned towards Sal Benedetto, his reporter's instincts, recognizing a once-in-a-lifetime story. This isn't just fighting. This is a masterclass in traditional martial arts versus modern techniques. When Tyler finally succeeded in closing distance, Donnie demonstrated why classical kung fu had survived centuries of evolution. His trapping hands controlled Tyler's arms while his footwork maintained perfect positioning, creating situations where Tyler's strength advantages became liabilities to Tyler's final desperate attempt. A rushing double leg with everything he had left resulted in him face down on the hotel's marble floor after Donnie executed a classical sprawl and redirect that turned aggression into helplessness. As Tyler struggled to his feet, his face showed the dawning realization that he was completely outclassed by someone operating on a level he'd never imagined possible. The makeshift ring fell silent as both fighters returned to their corners, but the quiet wasn't empty. It was pregnant with recognition and dawning understanding. The atmosphere had transformed from spectacle to reverence as guests processed what they'd witnessed. Phones emerged from purses and jacket pockets as the older attendees began explaining Donnie's significance to their younger companions. Google. Donnie Yen, Mickey Torino told his grandson, watching the young man's eyes widen as search results populated his screen. Holy shit, someone whispered from the crowd. It really is him. Ip Man himself. The recognition spread like wildfire through social media posts and urgent text messages. Screenshots of movie posters appeared on phone screens as guests shared images with friends who couldn't believe what was happening. The story was already moving beyond the hotel ballroom into the wider world. Lou Marcelli watched with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, recognizing a kindred spirit in Donnie's approach to combat. Both men had achieved legendary status not through brutality, but through the perfection of their craft, the elevation of fighting into art, the transformation of violence into something approaching poetry. Bobby the Bull Castellano nodded appreciatively. At each technique, his boxer's eye recognizing mastery regardless of style. That's what we used to call the sweet science, he murmured. Technique so perfect it looks like magic. The social media explosion had begun in earnest. Posts appeared across multiple platforms. This old punk is getting schooled by Ip Man himself, and Donnie Yen is literally here destroying some young fighter. The viral nature of the confrontation was becoming apparent as share counts climbed rapidly. Eddie Torino's promotional mind raced through damage control scenarios, realizing his fighter was losing badly to someone far more famous than he'd anticipated. This wasn't going to be the easy publicity win he'd envisioned. It was turning into a humiliation that could destroy Tyler's career. Tyler sat heavily on his improvised stool, sweat-soaked and breathing hard after 3 rounds of systematic deconstruction. His corner offered increasingly desperate advice while across the makeshift ring, Donnie stretched calmly, his breathing steady and controlled as the crowd's murmur grew into excited conversation. It became clear that what had started as an exhibition was becoming something much larger, a demonstration of why some legends achieve immortality while others simply fade away. The final round began with Tyler moving like a wounded animal, cautious, wary, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. The cocky fighter who'd strutted into the ballroom had been replaced by someone who finally understood he was facing a master operating on a completely different level. Tyler's approach became tentative, his movements telegraphing not aggression but genuine fear. He'd built his identity around physical dominance, but 3 rounds of systematic dismantling had shattered that foundation. Every technique he'd trusted, every advantage he'd relied upon, had been neutralized with almost casual precision. Desperate for some measure of success, Tyler launched into his most complex combination, a flurry of punches, elbows, and kicks that represented everything he'd learned in a decade of training. He put his heart, soul, and remaining energy into the attack, knowing it was likely his last chance to salvage some dignity. Donnie's response was pure artistry. He weaved through the assault like smoke given form, his body flowing between strikes with movements so fluid they appeared choreographed. Each evasion was economical, precise, beautiful in its efficiency. Tyler's most devastating techniques found nothing but air, while Donnie demonstrated why he'd become legendary. The crowd watched in stunned silence as classical Wing Chun techniques unfolded before their eyes. chain punches delivered with machine-like precision, trapping hands that controlled Tyler's arms while simultaneously positioning for devastating counters that never came, simultaneous blocking and striking that defied Tyler's understanding of combat timing. Tyler's frustration reached a breaking point as punch after punch met empty space. His breathing became ragged, his form deteriorating under the psychological pressure of complete failure. This wasn't just losing, it was being systematically educated in front of 200 witnesses. Finally, Tyler stopped attacking altogether. He stood in the center of the makeshift ring with his hands at his sides, shoulders slumped in defeat. His body language communicated what his pride couldn't allow his mouth to say: complete and total surrender. The exhibition should have ended there, with dignity intact and lessons learned. Tyler had been humbled but not humiliated, educated rather than destroyed. Then Eddie Torino raised his hand with a subtle signal that would transform education into something far more dangerous. Eddie's desperate hand gesture triggered chaos as Jake Martinez and Rick Santos grabbed metal folding chairs from nearby tables. Their movement was synchronized, predatory, designed to catch Donnie completely off guard while he faced their defeated fighter. The chairs whistled through the air toward Donnie's head and spine with vicious intent. What had been an exhibition was instantly transformed into assault with deadly weapons, the kind of attack that could cripple or kill regardless of the victim's skill level. But legends become legends for reasons that transcend normal human limitations. Donnie's peripheral vision and reflexes, honed through decades of real combat and choreographed action sequences, saved his life. He spun with inhuman speed, catching one chair with his forearm while ducking beneath the other, metal crashing against his bones with impacts that would have shattered lesser men. The ballroom erupted in screams as elderly guests scrambled for safety, overturning tables and scattering crystal glasses across marble floors. The elegant charity gala became a war zone in seconds, with chairs crashing into walls and decorations raining down from damaged fixtures. Tyler stood frozen in genuine shock, his eyes wide with disbelief at his team's treachery. He'd never authorized this assault and watched in horror as his reputation was being destroyed by his own corner's cowardice and desperation. The gentle instructor who demonstrated classical martial arts with patient precision disappeared, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. Donnie's movements became more definitive, more aggressive, as real danger demanded real responses rather than educational demonstrations. Janet Morrison's screams for hotel security echoed through the ballroom while guests pressed against walls and exits, trying to escape the violence that had erupted without warning. The formal atmosphere had completely shattered, replaced by primal fear and chaos. Eddie Torino's true nature revealed itself as he produced a small pistol from his jacket, pointing it at the panicked crowd with shaking hands. His voice cut through the chaos with desperate authority. Nobody moves. This exhibition just became a real payday. The charitable gala had transformed into something unthinkable, a hostage situation in one of Philadelphia's most prestigious hotels, with 200 innocent people trapped by a desperate criminal who'd bet everything on the wrong fight. Eddie's gun changed everything in the ballroom, transforming panic into paralyzed terror. Hotel security guards hesitated at the entrance, their training inadequate for an armed hostage situation involving hundreds of elderly guests who couldn't move quickly or take cover effectively. Everyone stay calm and nobody gets hurt, Eddie shouted, waving the pistol with the jerky movements of someone whose plan was disintegrating in real time. His desperation was palpable, sweat beading on his forehead as he realized how far beyond his control everything had spiraled. The truth spilled out in Eddie's panicked rambling. He wasn't just Tyler's manager. He was connected to underground gambling rings that had placed massive bets on Tyler winning quickly and decisively. The viral video of Tyler's systematic defeat would cost his criminal associates millions in illegal betting losses, money they would extract from Eddie's hide if he couldn't fix this situation. All phones and cameras get destroyed right now, Eddie demanded, gesturing wildly with his weapon. Every recording of this fight disappears, or people start dying. Jake Martinez and Rick Santos became more violent, using broken chair legs as clubs against anyone who might have recorded their humiliating criminal assault. They smashed phones and tablets with vicious enthusiasm, destroying evidence while threatening elderly guests who cowered behind overturned tables. Tyler faced the defining moment of his character. His manager was threatening innocent people with a gun while his cornermen attacked defenseless seniors with weapons. Everything about the situation violated every principle of sportsmanship and human decency he'd been raised to respect. Donnie positioned himself strategically between the gunman and the most vulnerable guests, his movements careful and calculated. At 61, outnumbered and outgunned, he had to protect a room full of people who couldn't protect themselves while neutralizing multiple attackers without getting anyone killed. Lou Marcelli, despite his age and trembling hands, tried to calm other terrified guests with whispered encouragement. The old boxer's courage shone through even as Eddie's gun pointed in his direction, demonstrating the heart that had made him a champion decades before. When Rick Santos raised his makeshift club toward Lou's head, Tyler's moment of truth arrived. Everything he claimed to believe about strength, honor, and what it meant to be a fighter would be tested in the next few seconds. Tyler's tackle saved Lou's life, sending Rick Santos crashing into a nearby table as crystal glasses exploded across marble floors. With that single action, Tyler officially switched sides in a battle between honor and greed, choosing to protect the innocent rather than support his criminal team. The ballroom erupted into complete chaos as Eddie waved his gun frantically while Jake attacked Donnie with the jagged remains of a broken chair leg. Elegant decorations crashed down as the violence spread, transforming the prestigious venue into a disaster zone. Donnie found himself fighting the most difficult battle of his legendary career, protecting panicked elderly guests who couldn't move quickly while simultaneously engaging armed attackers who had no regard for innocent lives. His defensive positioning became absolute as he created an impenetrable barrier between danger and vulnerability. Fighting alongside Donnie, Tyler finally began to understand what real martial arts looked like in practice. Every strike Donnie threw served a purpose beyond damage, protecting someone vulnerable, creating distance for civilians to escape, neutralizing threats without causing unnecessary harm. Power channeled through wisdom rather than unleashed through anger. "This is how you use strength," Donnie called out during a brief pause in the violence, his voice carrying over the chaos. His techniques demonstrated the martial arts philosophy he'd spent decades perfecting. Violence employed only to prevent greater violence, force applied with surgical precision rather than brutal excess. Tyler absorbed the lesson in real time, his own techniques improving dramatically as he learned to channel his natural athleticism constructively rather than destructively. He used his size advantage to shield vulnerable guests, while Donnie handled the more dangerous threats. Eddie's desperation grew exponentially as sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had managed to call 911 despite his threats. His illegal gambling connections meant prison if caught, making him increasingly unpredictable and dangerous as his options disappeared. The sound of approaching police sirens should have ended the violence, but desperate criminals rarely surrender gracefully. Eddie's next move would determine whether this night ended in justice or tragedy. Everyone stops fighting or the old man dies, Eddie screamed, pressing his gun directly against Lou Marcelli's temple. The ultimate test of heroism had arrived. With an innocent life hanging in the balance and a room full of witnesses watching to see who would step forward when it mattered most, the barrel of Eddie's gun pressed cold against Lou's temple as the legendary boxer trembled but refused to show fear. At 72, having survived 48 professional fights and decades of life's battles, Lou Marcelli faced his greatest test with the same dignity that had defined his career. The ballroom fell silent except for distant sirens growing steadily closer. Tyler stood frozen, his hands still gripping Rick Santos, but his attention completely focused on the gun threatening the man who'd become a symbol of everything honorable about boxing. Donnie raised his hands in apparent surrender, but his positioning was strategically perfect. He stood at precisely the right distance, close enough to act if opportunity arose, angled to protect other guests, balanced on the balls of his feet for explosive movement. Every muscle in his body was coiled like a spring while his face remained completely calm. Safe passage out of here and Tyler's original $10,000 as compensation for damages, Eddie demanded, his voice cracking under pressure. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he pressed the gun harder against Lou's skull. Try anything heroic and this old fossil's brains decorate the chandelier. Jake Martinez positioned himself near the main entrance, his broken chair leg raised, threateningly toward any hotel security personnel who might attempt entry. His prison tattoos seemed to writhe in the ballroom's flickering light as emergency vehicles gathered outside. "You don't want to do this, Eddie," Donnie said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd faced life-and-death situations before. "Your mother raised you better than threatening defenseless elderly people." The unexpected personal attack rattled Eddie's concentration for just a fraction of a second. His grip on the gun wavered slightly as emotional confusion replaced tactical thinking. It was the kind of psychological warfare that separated true warriors from mere fighters. Using words as precisely as physical techniques, Liu chose that moment to demonstrate why champions are made of different material than ordinary men. Despite the gun at his head, he whispered encouragement to other terrified guests, his voice steady and calm. "Stay strong, everyone. This will be over soon." Eddie's distraction lasted only an instant, but for someone of Donnie's caliber, an instant was all the opportunity required. Donnie moved faster than human eyes could track, his body exploding into motion with the precision of a Swiss watch and the power of a coiled spring. His right hand struck Eddie's wrist with surgical accuracy, while his left simultaneously redirected the gun's barrel away from Liu's head. The joint lock was perfect, a classical technique applied with decades of experience behind it. Eddie's wrist snapped with an audible crack as the gun discharged harmlessly into the crystal chandelier above, sending sparkling fragments cascading down like deadly snow. Eddie's scream echoed through the ballroom as he crumpled to his knees, clutching his shattered wrist while the pistol skittered across marble floors, spinning away from any of the combatants. His criminal plan had been dismantled in less than 2 seconds by someone who understood violence on a level Eddie couldn't comprehend. Jake Martinez charged immediately, his broken chair leg raised like a medieval weapon as he rushed to help his boss. But Tyler intercepted him with a tackle that demonstrated his newfound understanding of protective violence versus aggressive brutality. "Not happening," Tyler growled, driving Jake into the ground with controlled force that neutralized the threat, without causing unnecessary damage. His technique showed Donnie's influence. Power applied precisely rather than excessively to Donnie's simultaneous actions revealed why he'd become legendary in both real combat and choreographed action. Disarming Eddie, he'd also positioned himself to help Liu to safety while preparing for Jake's predictable attack. Every movement served multiple purposes, efficiency elevated to an art form. Hotel security finally entered the ballroom as the immediate gun threat ended, their tactical gear seeming almost comical compared to the devastation 2 men had prevented with nothing but skill and courage. Elderly guests crawled toward exits as EMTs began checking for injuries. Liu Marcelli, despite his ordeal, remained standing with Tyler's support, his dignity intact even after having a gun pressed to his head. The old boxer's eyes showed gratitude, but also something deeper, recognition of the kind of heroism that transcends age, nationality, or fighting style. "Thank you," Liu whispered to both men, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood exactly how close death had come. But the violence wasn't finished yet. Rick Santos, desperate and cornered, pulled a knife from his boot. Rick's knife blade caught the ballroom's fractured lighting as he faced both Donnie and Tyler, desperation making him more dangerous than skill ever could. Cornered animals fight without regard for consequences, and Rick had nothing left to lose except his freedom. The blade gleamed as Rick made wild slashing motions, forcing elderly guests to scramble further away from the violence. His movements were unpredictable, driven by panic rather than technique, which made him paradoxically more threatening to innocent bystanders than trained opponents. Tyler and Donnie found themselves working together naturally, their partnership forged in the crucible of protecting others. Tyler moved to shield vulnerable guests while Donnie addressed the knife threat directly, their coordination improving as understanding grew between them. "Use your size to protect, not dominate," Donnie called out as they maneuvered around overturned tables. Tyler absorbed the lesson immediately, positioning his larger frame between Rick and the elderly guests who couldn't escape quickly enough. Donnie demonstrated classical blade defense techniques that most modern fighters had never encountered. He grabbed a silver serving tray from a nearby table, using it as an improvised shield while maintaining perfect distance control. The tray rang like a bell as Rick's desperate strikes met polished metal instead of flesh. Tyler's technique improved dramatically under pressure and Donnie's guidance. He learned to use his strength defensively rather than aggressively, becoming a protector instead of a predator. His movements showed new understanding of how power should be channeled. Through wisdom rather than rage, Rick's desperation peaked as he realized both men were beyond his ability to intimidate or defeat. Police sirens were getting louder, his escape routes were blocked, and his makeshift weapons were useless against opponents who understood combat on levels he'd never imagined. In a final act of desperate violence, Rick lunged directly at Lou Marcelli with his knife extended, hoping to create enough chaos to escape in the confusion. It was the move of a coward, targeting the most vulnerable person in the room, Tyler. And Donnie moved simultaneously, their partnership now seamless. Tyler's block intercepted the attack, while Donnie applied a nerve strike that dropped Rick instantly. The knife clattered harmlessly across marble as Rick collapsed unconscious, his threat finally neutralized. The violence was over, but the consequences were just beginning. Police flooded through the ballroom's entrance as Rick Santos lay unconscious on marble floors, his knife safely away from any innocent hands. Detective Lisa Romano took charge immediately, her experienced eyes cataloging the destruction while EMTs began checking elderly guests for injuries. Tyler knelt beside the unconscious Rick, his hands raised in clear surrender as officers approached. With weapons drawn, the adrenaline was fading, leaving him face to face with the reality of his choices and their inevitable consequences. Tyler Brennan, you have the right to remain silent, Detective Romano began, producing handcuffs from her belt. Her voice was professional but not unsympathetic. She'd seen enough violence to recognize when someone had chosen the right side despite starting on the wrong one. Crime scene photographers documented the destroyed ballroom, while witness statements began in earnest. Elderly guests described the assault, the hostage situation, and Tyler's crucial decision to protect Lou when his own team turned criminal. He saved my life, Lou told Detective Romano, his voice steady despite his ordeal. That young man made terrible mistakes, but when lives were on the line, he chose to protect us instead of them. Donnie stepped forward as Tyler's unexpected advocate, his reputation lending weight to his testimony. Officer, this young man redeemed himself when it mattered most. He risked everything to protect innocent people from his own associates. The media circus was already beginning outside as news crews arrived to cover the story spreading across social media. MMA fighter learns honor from martial arts legend. The narrative was shifting from simple humiliation to something more complex, a story of redemption earned through courage. Eddie Torino and his crew were led away in handcuffs, their criminal assault and hostage-taking ensuring serious prison time regardless of their connections to illegal gambling operations. Justice was swift and decisive for those who'd chosen greed over humanity. Tyler accepted his arrest without resistance, understanding that actions have consequences regardless of eventual heroism. But his willingness to face those consequences, combined with his protection of innocent lives, would weigh heavily in his favor when legal proceedings began. As Detective Romano finished reading Tyler his rights, Lou made one final statement that would echo through courtrooms and news coverage for weeks to come. That young man made a mistake, but he made it right when lives were on the line. Lou declared to the assembled reporters outside the hotel, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned respect through decades of honorable competition. That's what champions do. Tyler sat in the back of Detective Romano's patrol car, watching through bulletproof glass as Lou defended him to a growing crowd of media representatives. The old boxer's words carried weight that could influence public opinion and potentially Tyler's legal future. Inside the hotel, District Attorney Michelle Patterson arrived to assess the complex legal situation. Tyler faced assault charges stemming from his initial confrontation with Lou, but his heroic actions during the hostage crisis created unprecedented complications for prosecution. He clearly assaulted Mr. Marcelli initially, Patterson explained to Detective Romano while reviewing witness statements. But his protection of the elderly guests during the armed assault demonstrates genuine character growth. This isn't a typical case. Character witnesses began stepping forward voluntarily. Hotel security guards who'd witnessed Tyler's transformation testified to his courage under pressure. Elderly guests he protected spoke about his willingness to risk injury, shielding them from violence. Donnie's testimony proved particularly influential with both law enforcement and media representatives. His reputation for honor and traditional values gave his words exceptional credibility when he spoke about redemption, second chances, and the moment when a person chooses to become better than they were. I have seen many fighters in my career, Donnie told the assembled crowd, his accent lending gravity to each carefully chosen word. Physical strength is common. Moral courage when everything is at stake, that is rare and precious. The media narrative continued evolving as details emerged. Tyler's initial arrogance and disrespect were balanced against his ultimate choice to protect the innocent, creating a complex story that resonated beyond simple sports coverage. Social media exploded, with debate about redemption, second chances, and what it truly means to be strong. The story touched deeper themes about respect for elders, the value of traditional martial arts wisdom, and the possibility of genuine character growth under pressure. As Tyler was processed through the legal system, one question dominated every conversation. Would his moment of heroism outweigh his initial mistakes, or would justice demand punishment regardless of eventual redemption? The answer would come in 3 weeks when Judge Harold Morrison prepared to determine Tyler's fate. 3 weeks later, Center County Courthouse buzzed with unusual energy as Tyler's sentencing hearing drew media attention from across the region. The young fighter sat at the defendant's table, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine humility as he faced the consequences of his choices. Character witnesses filled the gallery in unprecedented numbers. Lou Marcelli, despite his age and the trauma he'd endured, testified passionately about Tyler's transformation under pressure. His words carried the weight of someone who'd spent 70 years learning to judge character under extreme circumstances. Your Honor, I've been in 48 professional fights, but I learned more about courage watching this young man choose to protect strangers rather than protect himself, Lou stated, his voice steady and clear. That's the mark of a true champion. Several elderly guests who'd been present during the hostage situation spoke about Tyler's willingness to shield them from violence, using his own body as a barrier between weapons and vulnerable people. Their testimony painted a picture of genuine heroism emerging from initial arrogance. Donnie's testimony resonated throughout the courtroom as he spoke eloquently about redemption and the moment when a person chooses to become better than they were. His reputation for wisdom and traditional values gave his words exceptional influence with both judge and jury. In martial arts, we believe that true strength is revealed not in domination, but in protection of those who cannot protect themselves, Donnie explained. This young man discovered that strength when it mattered most. District Attorney Patterson acknowledged Tyler's heroism while insisting that actions must have consequences. Her recommendations surprised many. 200 hours of community service at inner-city boxing gyms, teaching young fighters about respect, sportsmanship, and the responsibility that comes with physical power. Mr. Brennan must learn to use his considerable talents to lift others up rather than put them down, Patterson argued. His community service should reflect the lesson he learned that night. Tyler's own statement to the court demonstrated the depth of his transformation. He took full responsibility for his initial assault while expressing genuine gratitude to Lou and Donnie for teaching him what strength really means. Judge Harold Morrison prepared to announce a sentence that would either destroy Tyler's future or provide the foundation for genuine redemption. Tyler accepted the handcuffs without resistance, his head bowed as the weight of consequences settled over him. Like a heavy blanket, the adrenaline had faded completely, leaving him face to face with the reality that heroic actions couldn't erase earlier mistakes. Wait, Lou's voice cut through the chaos, his cane tapping against marble as he approached Detective Romano. Despite everything he'd endured, the humiliation, the gun to his head, the terror, the old boxer's first instinct was forgiveness rather than revenge. Detective, that young man made terrible choices tonight, but when lives hung in the balance, he chose to protect us instead of his own interests, Lou said, his weathered hand touching Tyler's shoulder. That has to count for something. Tyler looked up with genuine surprise, seeing forgiveness in eyes that should have held nothing but anger. The gesture hit him harder than any physical blow he'd ever absorbed, demonstrating a kind of strength he'd never understood before. Donnie stepped forward to support Lou's assessment, his reputation lending significant weight to his words. Officer, I have witnessed this young man's transformation firsthand. He risked serious injury to protect elderly people from armed criminals. That is not the action of someone beyond redemption. Detective Romano listened carefully, her experienced eye, recognizing genuine character testimony versus mere damage control. The elderly guests Tyler had protected began adding their voices, creating an unexpected chorus of support for someone who'd started the evening as their tormentor. District Attorney Michelle Patterson arrived to assess the complex legal situation, her prosecutorial mind wrestling with a case that defied simple categorization. Tyler clearly faced assault charges, but his heroic actions created unprecedented mitigating circumstances. Outside, news crews captured Lou's public statement defending Tyler, the old boxer's words carrying moral authority earned through decades of honorable competition. That young man learned what it means to be a champion when it mattered most, Lou declared to assembled reporters. The media narrative began shifting from simple assault story to complex tale of redemption, respect, and the possibility of genuine character growth under extreme pressure. Tyler's fate now hung not just on legal proceedings, but on society's willingness to believe in second chances earned through courage. 3 weeks later, Center County Courthouse's oak-paneled courtroom filled with an unusual mix of boxing legends. Elderly charity gala attendees and media representatives drawn by a story that had captivated the region. Tyler sat at the defendant's table in a conservative suit, his earlier arrogance completely absent. Judge Harold Morrison, a respected jurist known for fairness tempered with wisdom, reviewed the extensive character testimony that had flooded his chambers. Rarely had he seen such passionate advocacy for a defendant who'd clearly committed assault. Lou Marcelli took the witness stand with assistance from his grandson, his testimony carrying the weight of 7 decades spent learning to judge character under pressure. Your Honor, I've faced dangerous men in professional rings, but I learned more about true courage watching Mr. Brennan choose to protect strangers rather than himself. The parade of elderly witnesses who testified on Tyler's behalf created an unprecedented scene. Hotel security guards described his transformation from aggressor to protector, while guests he'd shielded from violence spoke about his willingness to absorb punishment meant for them. That Donnie's testimony proved particularly influential, his reputation for honor and traditional values lending gravity to every word. He spoke about the moment when a person chooses to become better than they were, drawing from both Eastern philosophy and Western concepts of redemption. In my culture, we believe that true martial arts mastery includes moral development, Donnie explained to the court. This young man discovered his moral center when innocent lives depended on his choices. District Attorney Patterson surprised many with her sentencing recommendation: 200 hours of community service at inner-city boxing gyms, plus mandatory anger management counseling. Her proposal emphasized rehabilitation over punishment. Mr. Brennan must learn to channel his considerable physical gifts toward lifting others up rather than putting them down, Patterson argued. His service should reflect the lessons he learned through crisis. Tyler's own statement demonstrated genuine transformation as he accepted full responsibility while expressing gratitude to those who taught him about honor through their examples. Judge Morrison prepared to deliver a sentence that would either provide foundation for redemption or close the door on Tyler's future in combat sports. Mr. Brennan, you have been found guilty of assault, but the circumstances of your case are unlike any I've encountered in 20 years on this bench, Judge Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen every variation of human nature. Tyler stood with his attorney, hands clasped behind his back, accepting whatever judgment was coming. The transformation from arrogant fighter to humble defendant was complete, his posture reflecting genuine remorse rather than performed contrition. Your initial actions were inexcusable, assaulting an elderly man at a charity event designed to honor his contributions to sport and community, the judge continued. However, Your subsequent choices under extreme pressure demonstrated character growth that cannot be ignored. Judge Morrison's sentence reflected careful consideration of both justice and redemption. 200 hours of community service at inner-city boxing gyms, mandatory anger management counseling, and a requirement to speak at youth athletic programs about respect and sportsmanship. You will learn to use your talents to lift others up, Mr. Brennan, Judge Morrison declared. Your community service must reflect the lesson you learned that night, that true strength protects rather than dominates. The courtroom erupted in supportive applause as Tyler's sentence emphasized rehabilitation over punishment. Lou Marcelli's testimony had clearly influenced the judge's decision to focus on Tyler's potential rather than just his mistakes. 2 months later, Tyler pushed through the heavy doors of Lou's gym on South Philadelphia's struggling streets. The paint peeled from brick walls and the equipment showed decades of use, but the heart of the place remained strong, evidenced by the young fighter's training with intensity and respect. Lou looked up from wrapping a teenager's hands, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. Ready to learn what real training looks like? He asked, gesturing toward the ring where 3 young boxers practiced combinations with perfect form. Tyler nodded, understanding that his real education was just beginning. The community service that could have felt like punishment instead became the foundation for discovering his true purpose, using his strength to build others up rather than tear them down. The transformation that had begun in crisis would continue in service, proving that redemption is possible when someone genuinely commits to becoming better than they were. 6 months after the charity gala disaster, the same elegant ballroom hosted the Philadelphia Boxing Foundation's annual awards ceremony, completely rebuilt and more beautiful than before. The destruction had been erased, but the lessons learned that night remained embedded in everyone who'd witnessed them. Tyler received the Second Chance Award for his community service and complete transformation, standing at the podium where he'd once grabbed the microphone in arrogance. His acceptance speech was brief, humble, and focused entirely on thanking those who'd taught him about honor. I dedicate this to Lou Marcelli, who showed me what forgiveness looks like, and to Donnie Yen, who demonstrated that true strength protects rather than dominates, Tyler said, his voice carrying genuine gratitude rather than his former cockiness. Lou sat beaming at the head table, accompanied by 3 young boxers from their gym who'd become Tyler's first students in both technique and character. The old champion's eyes sparkled as he watched his former tormentor receive recognition for becoming exactly the kind of man the sport needed. Donnie attended as special guest of honor, having become an unofficial ambassador for bridging Eastern martial arts philosophy with Western boxing traditions. His friendship with Lou had enriched both men's understanding of what it truly meant to be a martial artist. The evening's keynote address came from Lou himself, speaking about second chances and the difference between strength and power. His words received a standing ovation from the same crowd that had witnessed his humiliation, proving that dignity and character create more lasting impressions than momentary victories. In a quiet moment after the ceremony, Donnie found Tyler working with his 3 young students in the hotel's small practice room. The scene represented everything the martial arts should be: knowledge passed down, respect maintained, strength used to build rather than destroy. A master is not someone who never falls down, Donnie told Tyler, watching him guide a 12-year-old through proper footwork. A master is someone who gets up and helps others stand. The lesson encapsulated Tyler's entire journey from arrogant fighter to humble teacher. As laughter filled the practice room and young voices asked eager questions about technique and tradition, it became clear that some victories are worth more than any championship belt. They're the ones that create better people and stronger communities for generations to come. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.